Welcome to today's webinar on dealing with ASB during the coronavirus pandemic. I'm Darren Burton, Head of Housing Consultancy, and I'll be delivering this session with my colleague Amy Sturton, Associate Solicitor. Before we start, just for those of you who don't know, I'd like to confirm that myself and Amy are actually married and we do reside in the same house, so there's no breaches of social distancing regulations here in this part of Lancashire today. Okay. Even in such unprecedented times, ASB hasn't gone away. In fact, it's increased significantly throughout the UK. And it's times like this when housing practitioners really demonstrate what a difference they can make to our communities through effective partnership working, innovation, supporting vulnerable customers to overcome the many challenges posed by the lockdown restrictions, to help them to sustain their tenancies and protect their health. The situation we find ourselves in is completely new. And although the ASB issues that are reported to us are in the main no different from the existing caseloads that we work with. We therefore need to be aware of the tools and powers that are available to us and have a clear understanding of what is out there in terms of accessing partnership links, both smartly and effectively, utilising the role of the third sector, which is more important than ever, and obtaining accurate customer data, facilitating individually tailored support plans for those who are most vulnerable and at risk in our properties, and also focusing on the importance of contingency planning, which is vital for this process. Whilst the key focus of housing and police and other agencies will always be on early intervention, advice and support, we also have a responsibility to act quickly and proceed with legal enforcement when it is appropriate to do so. In order to achieve successful outcomes, we must ensure that everything is in place, getting all our ducks in order and making sure we have a robust audit trail. This includes collaboratively working with the police, understanding the role of the courts, gathering evidence and maintaining regular contact with victims and witnesses at all times. During this webinar, we will be sharing our experience of working with several registered housing providers during the past few weeks, and also taking you through the key points of the Coronavirus Act 2020, which are most relevant to ASB practitioners. This will include an overview of how we obtained the first coronavirus injunction in Manchester. This is the first in a series of these webinars that are going to be delivered by the Housing Litigation team here at Forbes. We hope that you'll find them useful, and if you have any queries or questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. Our details will be on the slides, which are displayed there, and we'll keep you updated regarding any future sessions.
Right.
Okay, first off, the burning question: what has the coronavirus meant for ASB teams? As we said before in the introduction, antisocial behaviour hasn't gone away. Even in the face of a worldwide crisis, which has tragically taken the lives of over 30,000 people in the UK alone so far, ASB is still continuing. We've spoken to a number of ASB teams up and down the country these past few weeks, and they've unanimously stated just how busy they are. Spare rooms and kitchen tables have replaced the office and the patch as they deal with increased case referrals. These relate to a number of issues: neighbour disputes, domestic abuse, violent assaults, drug dealing, and more recently, unauthorised social gatherings. So in terms of dealing with these, the use of injunctions has without doubt been the most popular legal remedy so far for housing practitioners, as they strive to change behaviour, stabilise communities, and most importantly, keep vulnerable people safe. The government's announcement that notices of seeking possession will be stayed and new notices will have to be issued with a 3-month notice period. That's a lot of reference to the word notice there for you. This has meant that injunctions are the most practical way forward to enable that housing providers can achieve swift and effective outcomes. We therefore need to consider the way in which we gather and compile evidence, including witness statements, community impact assessments, and the use of CCTV footage. The use of IT and social media plays a critical role in this process to enable frontline staff to work remotely amidst lockdown restrictions and social distancing. Now, the recent government guidelines on essential lettings has also meant that strategies need to be in place to protect void properties from issues such as vandalism, arson and criminal damage, particularly in neighbourhoods which have been categorised as ASB hotspots, for want of a better term. In these situations where rehousing and/or void works is deemed essential, we must also ensure that our maintenance operatives are issued with the correct PPE and are able to undertake their work in a safe environment, which doesn't pose a risk to others, such as neighbouring residents and also key workers in the immediate locality. So during this time, we've got some following tasks here. These are most important than ever to follow, to have in place. for frontline ASB practitioners. So I'll just take you through them now. So first off, we've got monitoring, refreshing and updating customer data in relation to vulnerabilities, well-being, safeguarding and medical issues. We need to know those people in our communities who are most at risk and make sure there's wraparound support and protection in place, both within our own organisations and also with external partner agencies. This could just be a simple phone call on a regular basis, but knowing that the provider, the landlord, is there for them and keeping aware of any changes of circumstances. Keeping in regular contact with customers as a way of tackling social isolation and loneliness, which is massive on the wellbeing agenda at the moment, and I know a lot of organisations are really working hard and putting strategies in place to address this. This can include a range of social media options and other innovative ways to get key messages out and make sure that they're able to be signposted to support providers, which may provide support that they didn't even know about at that particular moment in time. As we said in the introduction, knowing what's out there in terms of local support provision, the availability of emergency, temporary and move-on accommodation throughout your region. So that's not just within your own organisation, it could be with the private sector, it could be other registered housing providers in the area. So it's a good opportunity to develop links. And this is particularly important where we've identified victims and survivors of domestic abuse who've come to the organisation and said that they've now got the confidence to move on. They've led that process and come to you for help. So how can we provide that help as quickly as possible? Also engaging with community resilience forums or the equivalent in your area at both a strategic and an operational level. So this is about flagging up issues, sharing knowledge and experience and promoting good news stories wherever they exist to enable the development of collective responses. So I think it's important to know that can your organisation access these forums? Are you already part of it? Who are the key people to go to and how do you get involved? A lot of this information will be available on local authority websites as well. So housing has a key role to play in this process and we need to make sure that we are on the table to keep people safe in our communities. Also familiarising yourselves with the court process. How are they operating during the coronavirus lockdown? Amy, have you got anything to say there regarding that?
Yeah, I think from a legal perspective, it's fair to say that the teams we work with up and down the country have adapted extremely well to the challenges that they now face as a result of social distancing rules. ASB teams are used to working in a very hands-on way, and much of their role will usually entail meeting with victims to take witness statements, interviewing perpetrators and attending professionals meetings to gather information. A lot of their work is done face-to-face and usually involves meeting with people, a wide range of different people to formulate solutions to problems. Then suddenly we're all working from home on the kitchen table. You can't leave the house, you can't visit complainants to undertake initial case assessments. You can't go out and interview perpetrators in relation to allegations that have been made, and you can't go out and have witness statements signed to deal with cases that you have ongoing. You probably don't have access to basic things like printers and scanners and the things that we all take for granted in the office, and most teams don't have any access to their offices whatsoever. So even basic things like sending out warning letters has suddenly become problematic, which has meant that we have to really adapt the way that we work. I'm pleased to say that we are quite a resilient bunch in ASB, and I think we've adapted incredibly well to the challenge. Some of the things we've done to address the challenges that we've faced include things like making more use of emails and telephones to speak to tenants and take information. That includes both victims and alleged perpetrators. The use of electronic signatures has been a big thing. We've been assisting clients to get access to those. So if you think it might be useful to you, then by all means get in touch and we'll do our best to help you get that in place so that you can at least sign things like housing management statements. and virtual meetings, Teams, Zoom, all the new technologies, not necessarily new technologies, but the things that we haven't necessarily had to take advantage of previously, we're now using. We're delivering workshops virtually like this, and we're really having to tap into all the things that we didn't previously really have the need to use. To me, the teams that I've been working with in housing associations up and down the country are doing a fantastic job of dealing with ASB in their communities during the pandemic, and responding to even bigger numbers of complaints. I think you can all be quite pleased with yourselves in terms of how you've responded to the challenges so far and how you've adapted to make sure that you can still deal with cases of ASB during the course of the pandemic. So just moving on now, we're going to have a quick look at some of the relevant provisions in the Coronavirus Act 2020 and have a look at the key points for you as ASB practitioners. Most of the provisions within the Act relate to the NHS and other public sector provisions, but if you scroll right down to section 81, you'll come across the relevant sections for us, which relate to the protection of tenancies, and it makes provision for the extension of the statutory notice period to 3 months. So what does that mean in practice? Firstly, all new notices that we now serve must provide a minimum 3-month notice period, which for ASB is a big change. Previously, if we were relying on ASB grounds, we could issue proceedings immediately after having served a NOSP. So going from that to a 3-month notice period is a big change, especially in cases where we have quite serious ongoing ASB that needs to be addressed. Secondly, existing possession cases have been stayed for a period of 90 days. The civil procedure rules were amended on the 27th of March and have now introduced a new practice, Direction 51Z. 51Z stipulates that all possession cases issued under Part 55 of the civil procedure rules will be stayed for a period of 90 days. And what that means, essentially, when a case is stayed, no steps at all can be taken on that case, not even making directions or taking any steps to progress the case. It essentially freezes in time, and we can't do anything further with that case at that point. You've probably all been receiving automatic notifications from the courts in this regard. Most of my ongoing possession cases were stayed automatically with provision for future hearings to be relisted in due course. We don't have future hearing dates at this point. All we know is that the cases have been stayed in accordance with that new practice direction. Finally, also just to touch upon the cases which have already progressed through the possession stages and reached warrant stage. The new practice direction also applies equally to those cases. So if you have a case that has already reached warrant stage, that will be stayed as well for a period of 90 days automatically. You won't be able to take any steps on those types of cases. The government are understandably keen to prevent people from being evicted during the course of the pandemic and having them roaming the streets or attempting to find alternative accommodation whilst services are already extremely stretched, or bunking on people's sofas or trying to find accommodation with family friends or relatives. That is why these provisions have been put in place to stop that from happening, which would obviously be incredibly dangerous. So going on to look at case building and how we can get a message out to the communities that despite the new protections that have been put in place in relation to possession cases, we are still keeping communities safe, we are still taking action, and we will not tolerate antisocial behaviour taking place within communities. I think it's fair to say that case building has probably been one of the biggest challenges we've seen during the pandemic. ASB officers are used to being able to get out into communities and properly assessing a situation in person before deciding what they should do next. They are used to being able to get out and knock on doors, speak to multiple neighbours about ongoing issues, speak to perpetrators, and really being able to use instincts to guide you in terms of what steps to take next in a case, and getting a feel for what's actually happening. Now this has all changed. We're all dependent on telephone, emails, and anything else we have access to take information. We can't actually go out and see people face to face. And it's really changed the dynamic of the investigation process. Officers are now having to communicate with victims in different ways, and sometimes that can mean that accessing information that should be readily available to us can be quite difficult. Some tenants don't always have access to emails or the internet, or they might not answer their phone when you're trying to get in contact with them to progress a case or to gather together further information. Likewise, most tenants and victims that we deal with won't necessarily have access to electronic signatures or the ability to sign and return witness statements. So that has made things quite difficult. So I just wanted to run through some of the things that we've done to try and assist with that process, really. Some of the things we have done include helping clients to access electronic signatures. I must admit it's the first time I've really started using an electronic signature, so it's all new to me as well, but we have been able to assist many of our clients to access their own electronic signatures, which they can use when signing their own housing management statements. We've been helping a lot more with the evidence gathering process as well. We've been speaking to witnesses and helping to prepare CPI compliant witness statements, because in many cases we've seen staff numbers down because perhaps people are self-isolating or going through the furloughing process. Staff may not have the same resources that they would ordinarily have, and they've also had a huge increase in cases. So we've been assisting quite a lot more in terms of the initial steps in a case, gathering together witness evidence. In cases where it isn't possible for witnesses to sign their own statements, we've been doing things like arranging to have their statement either emailed across to them, posted out to them with a stamped and addressed envelope so that they can send it back, but in some cases they can't do that. Or in some cases we will read their statement out to them over the phone in full, and then provide an explanatory section within their witness statement to confirm how they have given the witness statement and how they have received it back in full format. And what we can then do, and what we have been doing, is exhibiting unsigned but approved victim statements to housing management statements with an explanatory section to explain that as soon as possible the witness will sign the statement as soon as the restrictions have been lifted. We've also seen a big increase in instructions for us to issue pre-action warning letters in cases where clients don't necessarily have access to their offices to post out letters as they would ordinarily, the small things that we take for granted. Interestingly, we've had quite a large number of new instructions to send out large-scale cluster warning letters, for example, to all the properties on a street, or a cluster of streets, or in some cases to a whole estate, in cases where large gatherings have been reported to take place. So effectively you send out a cluster of warning letters on behalf of clients to large numbers of people, just to get the message out that it's not acceptable, that action will be taken if it continues to take place, and that as a landlord our clients are monitoring these situations. At our end, we have access to our offices. We still have staff based within offices to assist with things like printing letters, posting out letters, issuing new cases, all the kind of administrative tasks that we all take for granted, which we now desperately need and can't live without. We still have access to that. So it is very much business as usual for us in most ways, which is very helpful. In terms of urgent cases and ex parte applications, we've seen a huge increase in the number of those types of cases, simply because In many cases, there are few other options, especially in cases where ongoing serious ASB possession cases have been stayed, and the perpetrators almost think that they've now got a ticket to do as they please. The spotlight has been taken off them, the possession case has stopped, and to them it has in some cases sent out a message that it's business as usual and they can revert back to behaving antisocially. So we have seen a big increase in injunction cases and ex parte applications. The courts are dealing with those types of cases electronically and dealing with hearings the same day by telephone. So it's still very much business as usual in relation to those types of cases as well, just in a slightly different way. One particularly notable case that I have recently dealt with was the first UK coronavirus injunction. Apparently it was the first case issued in the country, I think it was. So I'll just give you a brief overview of what we did in that case to deal with a case which involved ASB and breaches of the social distancing rules. What had happened is we had a case which was already under investigation for low-level ASB, noise nuisance, drug taking, parties taking place, music, the usual types of things that we would investigate over a period of time, issue warnings and thereafter possibly issue proceedings if it was necessary. But in this case, the tenant in question lived in a block of flats, and within that block of flats, several residents were shielding in accordance with the new guidelines, either because they had health conditions or they were elderly. The tenant in question, following the implementation of the lockdown on the 23rd of March, continued very much as usual, didn't take any notice of the new rules that had been put into place or really pay any regard to the safety of the people living around him. And he continued to have parties and people coming and going from the property at all times of the day and night. Loud music parties taking place. The visitors were, it's fair to say, quite unsavoury in some cases and would be spitting and urinating in communal areas. And it was causing a lot of anxiety to the people living in the building. And upon that basis, we decided to issue an ex parte application for an injunction. We did that under the usual provisions of Part 1 of the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act. We incorporated most of the same terms that we would ordinarily in relation to violence, nuisance, annoyance, harassment, alarm and distress, and all the usual behaviour types. But we also included a specific clause which made reference to the new government guidelines on social distancing, and we implemented a clause within the injunction that stipulated that the tenant must not allow any member, anybody from outside of his household to visit the property, save for his own 2 children. And that was to last until the government officially lifted that element of the guidelines. At that point, we instructed our usual process server to attend and effect personal service. I've heard some tales from up and down the country that some organisations are struggling to find process servers who are still working during the course of the pandemic, but we haven't experienced any of those types of problems. We use an excellent process server, and he is actually travelling up and down the country for us to effectively serve injunctions, applications, much beyond his usual travel remit. So we're very grateful to have that in place. But that was the case that we dealt with. It's obviously still ongoing. It hasn't been finalised at this stage, but we did secure the injunction in the first place. It's good to see that the courts are willing to treat the potential spread of the virus very seriously and categorise it as antisocial behaviour within the description set out in Part 1 of the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act. And since then, we've gone on to deal with several other similar cases, different scenarios, but successfully in the same way. So it's very positive to see that that's the message that's being sent out from the courts up and down the country. So we will now move on to have a look at what the local partnership offer is during this time. I'll pass you across to Darren, who is going to talk through that with you.
Okay, back to me then. As we touched on previously in the webinar, it's essential to know what's out there in order to be able to do our jobs first and foremost, and also overcome these challenging circumstances. This highlights the importance of effective partnership working, and in particular the role of the relationship between housing and police is central to this, to enable us to achieve successful outcomes. And we must therefore have the assurance that all the relevant information sharing protocols, disclosure submissions and other associated documents that sit behind the frontline operational work are all in place and fit for purpose. Basically, any background challenges like that under these difficult situations are just adding to stress, the frustration, and preventing us from getting quick responses to people. I was dealing with a matter only this morning whereby a housing provider who I was already signed up to an information sharing protocol was still getting passed from pillar to post, from neighbourhood policing teams to governance teams to information teams. And, it's just sheer frustration, really, and it's things we need to overcome. And this is something that the Ask Forbes team, in conjunction with our partners, are really pushing for. So you have those name contacts, you can address the issues. And first and foremost, all you really need that information for is to make sure that people are safe, or to take action against people who are causing misery and antisocial behaviour in your communities. So it should be really straightforward, and we're looking to kind of unpick and uncomplicate that process. So we're not really dealing with 9-to-5 situations, and I know ASB practitioners who will be listening to and watching this webinar will say that we don't do 9-to-5 anyway, myself included, and same for Amy as well, I'm sure. So you might come across some personnel changes as well. You might find that people in external partner agencies who you work with for a number of years perhaps are either ill themselves, self-isolating, or they've been furloughed. So in some situations you may be going back to square one and contacting organisations, speaking to people you've never spoken to before. Now, whilst this can be frustrating, we can also look at this as a positive to build new links with people and perhaps to work a bit differently and a bit more smartly in these situations. So there are positives to be had, and we're all about positives at the end of the day. So other things to consider are, are you aware of community hubs in your area that have been set up as a means of providing support, information and public reassurance? And if not, how can you get involved in these? Now, these can often be set up, obviously remotely now, but through the community centres, virtually, getting updates on social media, Facebook pages. So you're constantly getting refreshed and you're finding out what's happening almost by the minute, really. Support workers for other organisations and volunteers from charities often go and visit your customers, your tenants. So how can you tap in with it to these if you're not already doing so? I've come across examples recently where homeless charities are actually extending that support offer. So it's not just homeless people and service users. They're reaching out to anyone who is vulnerable, who's at risk in the community, dropping off food parcels, doing telephone conversations, having conversations at distance from the doorstep as well. So any messages that you can get out to your tenants through them as well, it's an extra pair of hands and it's really useful. And again, it gives that reassurance to vulnerable tenants during these unprecedented times that housing is there for them. And also, it's really pushing, in terms of our partnership arrangements, the real true value of housing in these circumstances, what we can offer as an industry. Is your team holding daily or weekly video conferences with the police? I've come across some examples recently that I know that's happening in the Northeast at the moment. That's a good opportunity, as Amy mentioned, Microsoft Teams and Zoom and other platforms, just to kind of touch base on a daily basis. Has there been an issue on one of your estates, one of your neighbourhoods that you need to know about that you weren't aware of already? So again, how can we put that right? How can we put an action plan in place? And again, you're not able to go down to the local police station or the local housing office, but you're having those conversations as you would do anyway. So really, there's no real change in that sense. Have you obtained clarity as to the police's stance on applying for premises closure orders during lockdown? Now, this can differ from region to region, and it's also, as we know, difficult for ourselves as housing practitioners who don't have the statutory powers to deal with them ourselves. Is it the police dealing with them in that area? Is it the local authority? And again, have you got name contacts? This can obviously be a bit of a challenge for people working for large national housing providers with dispersed stock. It's all about knowing who to contact. You and your colleagues maintaining regular dialogue with the courts. Given the fact that a number of coronavirus injunctions have now been obtained throughout the country, there's a lot of best practice to share, learning outcomes. It's an opportunity to evaluate, reflect and scrutinise how you arrived at that particular outcome, what it means, if there's any appeals in the pipeline, and working closely with the legal services providers such as Forbes to put plans in place and having that contact. Do you already have strong links with domestic abuse services, women's centres, etc.? This is absolutely vital at this moment in time, as you'll have read in the press and seen in Inside Housing and other updates. The spike in domestic abuse during this time has been absolutely significant. So we, as a key partner agency, need to play our part in making sure that our vulnerable tenants are protected, particularly when someone's come to us and with the confidence to finally move away from that situation. They need emergency accommodation. So how can you or a partner agency or another housing provider who you work with facilitate that and get everything in place to give that confidence and reassurance and help someone keep safe and move forward with their lives, and also deal with the issues of the perpetrator as well. Another thing to consider, are you touching base with local schools at the moment? What's the dialogue like there, particularly the ones who are open to support key workers and provide childcare for their children? They're still the eyes and ears of the community. They'll be speaking to parents on a daily basis. And again, young people themselves will be having conversations about what's been happening that particular night, what they've seen. They might have seen, barbecues that have got out of hand over the back fence near where they live, for example. There might be, I know a lot of people are doing street bingo, ideal if it's done at a social distance, but, again, we've had examples where that's become chaotic, particularly where there's been drinking involved. So again, tapping into those local schools, having those links, you can never have enough links. So in terms of partnerships, I think that's it for us. So I think we'll move on to the next section, which is me again, and that's looking at the gaps and challenges. So again, we're just highlighting some of those that have been brought to our attention, that have been relevant in the cases that we've dealt with. And again, it's a huge learning curve for everyone concerned. There's going to be challenges, but it's about how we overcome them collectively. If we hear a situation has been dealt with in, Birmingham, then, can that be replicated and looked at in Leeds and vice versa, for example? The processes that we use are often very similar, but if a particular area has been at the forefront of dealing with something in a unique way, or first of all, then how can they share that learning and prevent us from reinventing the wheel? So that's really important. So one of the things to consider, a challenge that has been brought to our attention, is can ASB practitioners who work on behalf of the large organisations still maintain that detailed local knowledge whilst working remotely, often from faraway locations? You might have a frontline ASB officer who's working from home 50, 60 miles away from where their patch is. So how can they have the tools and the ability to keep in touch with what's going on their patch? And again, the whole role of social media and everything is more important than ever, but this shouldn't be seen as a barrier. It can be in some ways, but again, that goes back to the strength of local partnership links and having everything in place before you have to deal with a case, so you know to contact before that situation arrives, so you're not going around in circles, and you can get those responses to the complainants and victims, give them the reassurance and keep them updated on what's going on, rather than having to say, we've contacted such and such an agency, but we're kind of we're drawing a blank there, and we want to be on the front foot all the time wherever possible. One of the strengths of housing, as I'm sure we all agree, is that as a sector, getting behind the door of someone's home, seeing what's going on, how someone's conducting a tenancy, are they struggling to cope, are the drug and alcohol related issues that are visible, does someone need particular support? Now, we haven't got that because we're not able to knock on people's doors. So how can we ensure that, we're still getting the picture of what's going on through linking with other agencies, through our customers themselves, and, maintaining that picture to put the support in place. And just because we can't physically get into homes doesn't mean that we can't do things. Another potential barrier, and I know Amy alluded to this earlier, is serving injunction papers on people who are self-isolating. And again, that can apply to issues with sheltered schemes as well for organisations who have that particular type of stock. So it's looking at ways to overcome that in a safe way without putting yourselves at risk, or the residents, or those themselves who are diagnosed with coronavirus or showing the symptoms. Again, as we said about getting behind the doors, also getting out on the patch, doing your walkabouts, this whole thing about the eyes and ears of the estate, knowing what's going on. A lot of people have worked on the same patch for a number of years, so you've got those contacts. You've often housed the families, sometimes their children and the grandchildren as well in some cases as well. So you've got, that immense local knowledge, and it's kind of dealing with that, but dealing with it virtually rather than there physically out on the patch. So not letting that be a barrier, but still maintaining that evidence and gathering evidence and information all the time, and sharing that appropriately and safely through the appropriate legislation as well, to make sure that other key partners who need to know have that information to hand. Also as well, for staff from organisations who are doing essential void works or maintenance works, making sure that they have the correct and appropriate PPE available to them as well, so when they're attending properties, they're working safely. Again, we touched on this earlier, but it's worth pointing out again. Does your organisation have access to process servers at this moment in time who have the capacity to respond quickly to your requirements, particularly where ex parte injunctions are concerned? Again, customer profiling data. Is this really accurate? Is it constantly being updated? Because if we don't have the right information, particularly around who's living in a property, then that can complicate matters in terms of case investigations, particularly where there's those issues of allegations of social gathering and breaches of the coronavirus in terms of social distancing, parties and everything that Amy described in her case as well. Refreshing that data, making sure that everything's up to date in terms of who's logged living at a tenancy, who shouldn't be there, if there are any restrictions in place as well. Looking at bail issues as well, linking in with the police. Has anyone bailed to that address who you don't know about? So it's finding out every scrap of information you can that's relevant to build your case. Does the case fit the coronavirus test? Again, or could it just be argued that it's a general ASB injunction as well? If it's too tenuous, then it could be defended. So it's protecting the organisation against that risk of having those defences, and meeting the test. And again, that's where you'll be linking with Amy and her colleagues regarding the particular legal side of this whole partnership case. So also, we discussed the strength of the third sector and the value that they can bring, but it's also mindful that during these times of economic crisis, there's financial pressures and a furloughed workforce, that could result in gaps. So you may not be able to work with those organisations at this moment in time in the same way, or in the most extreme circumstances. Sadly, we do hear stories that some charities have folded because of the financial pressures. But critical to this section, and why I put this as one of the points, is the risk of having that lack of specialist advice and support if we're looking at working with customers with any form of disability, or who have specialist needs, or if you're looking at the BME community, for example, as well, to have that local knowledge and the relevant support that perhaps we can't give generically. So if that support isn't available in that particular area, can we source it from a neighbouring local authority? Is there another charity or another organisation that we weren't previously aware of that have come to the fore, and we can work with them as well? So again, going back to, as we stated originally in the previous section, knowing what's out there through your partnership links. The final section for me now, and this is just a quick one really, but we thought it would be useful to provide some feedback, some anecdotes almost, that people have told us from up and down the country, sharing their experiences during these times. So just here are a few of the comments for you. So the first one, partnership working has improved in areas where we previously struggled to build links. It feels like there's more of a willingness and an acceptance to work together during these challenging times. Now, for someone like me who works with partnerships on a daily basis, it's pretty much the key part of my job. This is music to my ears. So really, how do we harness this and make sure that, once everything's back to normal, or as normal as it can be, we're not going back to square one. These positive signs where partnership relationships have established or strengthened, how can we keep that going? And that's absolutely pivotal to the whole process. Another one, relationships between housing and health are being developed in times of uncertainty, which gives us confidence to work collaboratively in the future. if we look at sometimes the barriers of working with health, particularly mental health teams, for whatever reason, that I'm sure we've all had throughout our careers and our experiences in housing, how can we use this as a platform? You're looking at everything such as, thresholds, the links between A&E admissions. You might be looking in a more preventative role, working with CCGs, looking at social prescribing and issues like that. So it does open up a whole new opportunity to work with our health colleagues in a better way, or as we've never done before. So again, that's really positive. We've also heard that some registered housing providers have successfully obtained premises closure orders through the police where the notices have been stayed, yet ASB has continued. So again, we've had some frustrations in the past where we've felt that premises closure orders should have been applied for and granted and haven't been. And now we're seeing a bit of a change of tack where the police are on the front foot proactively obtaining those powers, which is beneficial to the housing provider and also the other residents who live in that locality, keeping them safe. A number of housing associations have also acknowledged the speed and flexibility with which the court service has dealt with injunction applications whilst working remotely through teleconferencing. Again, that's a plus, and I think that's possibly something that may well continue going forward, Amy. So we think. And finish off, not so much a positive, but again, it's part of our work as well. We're still experiencing some inconsistencies from region to region regarding information sharing between police and housing practitioners during these times. So that's something that, obviously we're keeping on with on a daily basis and looking to address. So that's the feedback.
So you'll see that contact details are on the screen. They almost weren't. If anyone does have any questions or queries that they want to raise with us, either Darren or I or anybody else within the wider team, please do get in contact with us by telephone or by email, and we'll respond to you as quickly as we possibly can. And thank you very much for logging in to watch this session. We hope you've enjoyed it. We hope you found it informative, and please get in touch if you have any questions.